Now, the July 2021 unrest left the South Africa Special Risk Insurance Association with more claims than it could handle. Now, the electricity crisis is forcing South Africans to think about taking to the streets. Sasria is calling on people to find alternative ways to protest. For more on this, we're joined by Sasria CEO Mpumi Tyikwe. Thank you very much for joining us this morning as CEO. And maybe let's start with those very concerns that you all have as an organization. Where do they stem from that you might find that this crisis will take South Africans in their numbers to the streets to protest the crisis, but also the the tariff increases that will be coming into effect in April? Tell us a little bit more about that concern.
Good morning to you and good morning to your viewers. Yes, what we've noticed is that there's been an increase in social media where people are urging for some form of protest against the NERSA increases on Eskom tariffs, and also the stage 6 load shedding we've had over the last week or so. So we are seeing that, and then we've seen early evidence of that. There have been some sporadic protests around the country. We saw them in places like Witbank and also Kroonstad. And as I said, you can see in social media that there are more people who are saying, let's go out on the streets and protest.
One of those are the different unions. We spoke to Giwusa a little bit earlier on in the week. They are galvanizing all unions and trade federations to come together to do the same. And I suppose you're right, with the last riots we saw, they did start on social media and it just culminated into what we saw as the July unrest. In terms of Sasria and your reserves, would you have enough to deal with the amount of claims that could potentially culminate from a potential riot action if we do see something of that nature?
Look, let's go back to July 2021 and look at the cost of that particular event. There we had claims of in the order of 32 billion rand. Those claims happened over a period of 10 days. And it just took 10 days to destroy what was the reserve that were built in Sasria over 45 years. At that time, we had 9.5 billion rands of reserves in place, and they were totally wiped out by that event. And we had to get support from government for us to be able to meet our liabilities and meet our claims. The money that comes from government comes from us as South Africans. It comes from the taxes that we pay and the debt that the government raises from time to time. That money could have been spent somewhere else. Now, to answer your question more specifically, Sasria now is in a process of rebuilding its reserves from the loss of July 2021, where it's just 1 year. We're not even 1 year into it. So the reserves that we have are not that significant at all compared to what we had built over 40 years when the July happened. So just to give you an example, Sasria will be able to handle a claim event up to 5 billion rand. But even at 5 billion rand, will require government support of at least 100 million rands. That is what our calculations show at the moment. If the number balloons to, let's say, we get a claim event of 10 billion, the support that we will require from government is in the order of 2.7 billion. Now, I think as South Africans, we can agree that money could be spent somewhere else instead of fixing the things that we destroy during a protest.
Yeah. Have you been engaging government at all with these concerns and the fact that they might need to brace themselves to assist with that 100 million rand that you've calculated you might need should any calamity happen?
Yes, we do have ongoing consultations and meetings with our representative shareholder of government, which is the Minister of Finance and Treasury. So there are ongoing discussions. I mean, these numbers we did provide as early as October last year to just give an indication of what can potentially happen if things go wrong in South Africa. But we would like things not to get there. I think South Africans, we are a maturing democracy. We've got other alternative ways of demonstrating our anger or our frustration. Yes, South Africans, it's well understood where the anger is coming from. We've had more than 15 years of load shedding. people will have hoped by now there would be a solution to this particular crisis that is faced by Eskom. None seems to be emerging, and we think that by protesting, we can make decision makers move a little bit faster on these issues. I think it's interesting to see that there are other alternative ways that are being explored by South Africans to address this particular concern. There are actions that are being taken through the courts or exploring legal avenues. So I think a combination of those things can help direct South Africans' frustrations, which will bring about a sustainable solutions to the intractable problems that are faced by Eskom.
Mr. Tyikwe, maybe just take us into your confidence in terms of the claims process that does happen with the July 2021 unrest as an example, the claims process and the paying out and the rebuilding, the frustration around that, because in the meantime, people sit without work, businesses are not operating. So that process within itself is also quite a burden and on an already struggling economy. So maybe just break down that process when it did happen, and really just the consequences that it had on the communities that were affected in KZN and parts of Gauteng.
First, let's say one of the most devastating consequences of that event is the unnecessary loss of life that often accompanies our protests. You will recall that more than 350 South Africans lost their lives during that incident. Yes, there was damage to property. There are also other damages, like people lost their jobs, their livelihoods were affected. I mean, as recent as last week, when one of our clients, Shoprite, were in a process of rebuilding the mall, they found a body in there, which goes back to the July incident. So there is this terrible loss of life, and I think as South Africans, we need to reflect as to how we protest. Now, to answer your question more directly as to what happens. For a customer to have Sasria cover, in most instances, they have other conventional insurance that will cover them against flooding, against vandalism, against if they have a fire in their properties. Some will have an advice of the broker. Sasria has got agreements with the more than 65 insurance companies that operate in South Africa. So all these non-life insurance companies can offer you Sasria cover on our behalf. When you have a claim, the first part of call is to call that insurance company and advise them of the claim, and then they will in return advise us. As Sasria, what we are doing going forward, we're putting proactive mechanisms for us to detect where protests are happening, so that by the time the claim arises or we get know of the claim, we know that there has been that event in a particular area. So let me give you an example. For instance, there was a mushroom factory that was burnt down in KwaZulu-Natal 6-7 months ago. The cost of that claim is quite significant. It runs into hundreds of millions. We were able to know that there is going to be this claim that's going to come to us even before the client gets not. So when we receive that claim, we appoint loss adjusters and we pay the claim as quickly as possible. The difficulty that often arises out of this process or the claims process is that some clients, their documentation gets destroyed during the fire, for instance, and they are unable to prove to us that they had so much stock, they had so much equipment, and so on in their stores. So what I would advise clients through their insurance brokers, they must keep a backup of records of their financial transactions off-site. So that means they must not be kept in the premises where they operate from, to make it easy for us to assess their claims. Of the July incident, we have paid up to 92% of the 32 billion rand claims that we've had. We still have about 2.1 billion rands of claims that we still have to pay. And we are going through those challenges with those clients. But most of them, as I say, have been paid.
I suppose that might be one of the reasons that would constitute a rejection, in that documents that make the claim valid in terms of stock and whatnot being destroyed in the incident. But just for the benefit of those listening or clients, what other measures would constitute for rejection if there is an instance of that nature?
Look, as I say, a Sasria event is normally very, very clear to identify. So we are always able to detect whether the client is telling us the truth or not, because it's widely publicized in the media. I mean, the media does a good job of indicating where events are happening in South Africa, and also social media, be it Twitter, Facebook, or even Instagram in certain instances, which we monitor. We are able to detect where claims are. So it's very rare that we will reject a claim, a Sasria claim, because we are in a unique position in South Africa. We are the only insurer that is able, or that is allowed, to provide cover for public violence, civil disorder, labor unrest, and also terrorism. So it's very rare that as Sasria we reject a claim. We've had instances, though, where, for instance, in certain areas, like, for instance, you are a driver of a bus, you see 4 people approaching the bus, and you think the people are protesting. You run out, you park the bus, and the driver runs out. And then what occurs in those instances? And then the 4 people start banning the taxi. Then there's always often this debate: is it a vandalism, pure vandalism, or because there are often disputes between the taxi industry and the bus industry, or is it really civil unrest? So we've had those few isolated incidents, but in general, Sasria would pay. The other thing that I will appeal to clients is that don't try and inflate your numbers, and don't take chances, because we've got an ongoing relationship with SARS. So whatever we pay, we report it to SARS, and there is that exchange of information. And in the July events, there were very few incidents where we picked up fraud.
And then finally, we do know that South Africa, synonymous with protests during wage negotiations across the different sectors, and of course negotiations amongst government employees and the like are currently underway, and the list goes on. Is Sasria, in and amongst finalizing the July unrest claims, ready for the strike season that we may be looking forward to, apart from Eskom, that we might be seeing?
True. I mean, last year, over and above the July unrest, we had to deal with 2 billion rands of claims. That happened because, whether it's, as you are saying, a strike season, university students banning the university infrastructure because they have one form of protest, and as I again alluded to, the factory fire that we had. So as Sasria, we are ready to do that. And we do have the financial resources and the means to do that. In any one year, Sasria collects 4.3 billion rands of premiums, and which makes us able to pay claims between 2.5 to 3 billion rands in any one year. So we are quite ready. But it's been fortunate, though, in the last year, and I hope South African labor takes this forward. You'll have seen that there have been various negotiations that last year took longer than normal. Think of the public sector wage negotiations. Eskom required an intervention of a Minister of Public Enterprises, but also it took a little bit longer. We saw also in the mining sector, where the strike action, the negotiations took much longer than anticipated. But what has been encouraging out of that, we didn't see the outpouring of the frustration into the streets and destruction of property. Yes, workers went through a lot of pain during that time because of work and no pay, but we didn't see it culminating in some form of street actions that lead to destruction. I hope that continues going forward, and also should people take onto the streets insofar as ESCOM protests are concerned, I hope we do it in a very peaceful manner.